Women in Climate is a podcast sponsored by GIB Asset Management and brought to you by The National. GIB Asset Management is a boutique asset manager with sustainable investments at the core of their active investment business. Their belief is working together as one, bound by a common purpose to be a force for performance, a force for better. Find out more at gibam.com. Today, I am delighted to welcome you all to the first episode of the Women in Climate podcast, presented by GIB Asset Management. We're recording live at the World Economic Forum in Davos with a fantastic panel of guests, who I'll introduce shortly. But first, a bit about this podcast. This podcast was started for two main reasons: to celebrate the achievements of extraordinary female leaders in the climate space, and also to highlight the extraordinary effect that climate change has on women and girls around the world. A couple of years ago, a report published by the UN said that by 2050, climate change may push up to 158 million more women and girls into poverty. That's 158 million. That's equivalent to the entire population of Bangladesh in 2025, more than the population of the UK and Germany combined, or, to put it in local terms, that's 17 times the population of Switzerland. Another UN study identified that 80% of the people displaced by climate change are women, and as the primary caregivers and providers of fuel and food, they and their families are more vulnerable when flooding and drought occur. Despite these numbers and the many amazing female innovators and entrepreneurs, it's a well-recognized fact that women's voices are missing from climate discussions. By celebrating and raising women's voices, this podcast seeks to inspire bold action, foster resilience, share lessons learned, and champion progress towards a sustainable future. So, let's get started, shall we? Our conversation today is on the topic of maintaining momentum, looking at the opportunities to accelerate climate solutions and embolden action against climate change. We're recording just a few days after the inauguration of President Trump, which has thrown the US's commitment to climate action into question. But climate action is not the story of one man or one country. It is a global story. And around the world, we are seeing many encouraging signs, from record-breaking EV adoption to the end of coal power in the UK, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, and, as The Economist called it last summer, the dawn of the solar era, with $2 trillion going into clean energy technologies in 2024. Joining me to discuss this crucial topic are four incredible women, all of whom are exceptional leaders in their field. Dr. Manar Al-Manif, Chief Investment Officer for NEOM, the organisation behind the pioneering 170-kilometre-long The Line project in Saudi Arabia, and many other incredible things going on in that region. Dr. Rhian Murray-Thomas, Chief Executive of the Green Finance Institute, who tests, demonstrates and scales the financial solutions needed to accelerate the transition to a net zero and nature-positive economy. Marissa Drew, Chief Sustainability Officer for Standard Chartered Bank, in charge of the bank's sustainability strategy, sustainable finance, and net zero delivery teams. And my partner in crime on this, Catherine Garrett-Cox, Chief Executive of GIB Asset Management, a boutique asset manager who have sustainable investment at the core of their business. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Manar, Dr. Rhian Murray-Thomas, Marissa, and Catherine. So, Catherine, firstly to you. This is the first episode of the Women in Climate podcast. Talk to us about why you and the GIB team wanted to highlight the role of women in climate. What's worked so far, and where do you think we need to push now?
Well, firstly, good morning, and thank you all so much for joining us for this really groundbreaking launch today. And mostly a huge thanks to these incredible women that I'm sitting on stage with. We're sitting here today in the Heimat Museum. And what we've just learnt about Heimat is that it means the place we belong. And I think we belong here. And for so long, there has been a very clear sense that, as you said in your introduction, Naomi, women's voices have often been lacking in this whole climate conversation. And you're absolutely right. This has been a very strange week, to have been here in Davos. I'm sure some of those conversations will come out. But yet we have to celebrate the progress that we have made over the past few years. And I've been now working in the finance sector for more than 35 years, which is a scary statistic in and of itself, to be honest, as old as time in some ways. But actually, we have made progress. We've had huge societal progress on many different topics. We're able to live longer. We're able to live healthier. But yet the planet, this great Mother Earth that we call our home, is in crisis. And so one of the reasons that I was so enthusiastic about this topic is, how do we shine a light on some of the amazing work that is being done on this really critical topic? As Sherry Madeira, who runs CDP, would say, it's about Earth positive action. And what can we do to both build a community, create a network, and most importantly, shine a light on some amazing role models who are really rocking this world, to ensure that we can hand the baton on to the next generation. And I think if we can achieve that, that would be incredible. The last thing I would say is, when I had this slightly crazy idea about a year ago, I was looking around to see who could I find to partner with me on this. And I got such an enthusiastic response from you, Naomi. So a huge vote of thanks to you, and also to the many other women who will follow as part of the series, who've been so willing and giving of their time.
Thank you. Some of whom are in the room today, actually, Jane Burston and Sherry Madeira. So a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us. And to listeners at home, tune into future episodes and subscribe via any podcast platform to find out more. Rian Mari, we just mentioned it there. Earth positive action. This is not about one man. This is about the world. But we do have a new president in the United States, and we're witnessing a bedding in of the ESG anti-ESG backlash that we've been observing over the past 18 months. How are you reframing the narrative for the private sector to really engage to maintain that sustainability focus?
Thank you, and thanks very much to Catherine for inviting me to join the podcast today. Obviously, this has been the topic of the week, and it's clearly it's still early days to say exactly how the announcements at the Trump inauguration and today's announcement that he's pulling back on some of the IRA support that has seen such a huge growth in clean energy investment in the States is really going to work out geopolitically. But I think the point that I've been making this week very much is, it isn't woke capitalism to invest in clean energy, clean infrastructure, or any other investment that actually yields an attractive risk-adjusted return. The issue we have is that, to date, some of the investment opportunities where we would like to see capital redeployed, they aren't yet at a stage where they do yield the same comparative risk-adjusted returns as business as usual. And so part of our challenge, and the theme at Davos this week has been very much collaboration, as it always is, but collaboration through intelligence, which does seem a little ironic in some respects. But collaboration, we need to double down where we've seen collaboration work well, and in particular, collaboration between policymakers, industry, and finance. So how do we create those conditions such that investing in the technologies of the 21st century, investing in the earth positive investments that we need to see, is as attractive to the mainstream financial community as the work that they already do? And that is where, emboldening the politicians to provide us not only with the enabling policies and industrial strategies that we need, but also some of the de-risking mechanisms, some of the more creative financial solutions that we've seen. And I'm sure Marissa will also share some fantastic examples from Standard Chartered, but that we're starting to see already work, and we're seeing it mobilize capital. So I do think there's been a sense I think there's been a real sense of optimism amongst many people here in Davos that there were always going to be boulders in the stream, but there's enough momentum. This is an unstoppable green revolution that will continue because there are enough of us who are giving our time and our energy and our smarts to making it happen.
Thank you, Rian Mari. Dr. Manar, boulders in the stream, I think that's a really wonderful analogy. And to that point, are you seeing more boulders than free-flowing water? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the green agenda?
Optimistic does not mean that I'm ignoring all the challenges. I am very optimistic, but there is a lot of challenges for us to overcome. These challenges, you're trying to develop a completely new ecosystem that does not exist. Start from developing the regulation that will support this, the financing, the people, the infrastructure. And let's remember, each country is going to be very different in terms of their agenda as well as speed when it comes to green energy, as well as moving toward more a greener society. Let's look at the current infrastructure that exists. Whenever you look at it from a finance perspective, you're simply, using certain number of years to be able to, monetize or do it on a certain number of years. Example, there is new asset that came to our region that are just less than 10, 15 years. So it would require a huge amount of capex for you to say all of a sudden, I'm going to be able to move. So some developed countries are actually going to move at a much faster speed because these assets has been running, coal power plant and others, have been running on for the last 40 years. So it's an easy task now from them to move it. Versus other developing and emerging countries, it's going to take longer time because a lot of these assets, coal-fired plants, as well as gas, as well as certain types of natural gas, it's just started for the last 5 years. It doesn't make economic sense for you to move there. So I am very optimistic. It is going to happen. There is a lot of challenges that we need to work on developing. Equally, there is a lot of work that actually have been done so far that makes me feel even more optimistic, and the speed. If you look at the speed of technology development toward a greener society, I'll tell you what, 15 years ago, when I used to speak about solar in Saudi Arabia, the discussion went end in a nanosecond because solar was 12 times more expensive than natural gas. It didn't make economic sense. Guess what? Today, in the world capital of energy, solar and wind is by far more competitive than fossil fuel. So the speed of technological advancement is actually helping us to move even much more faster in doing this. Equally, the new generation. The new generation are always focusing on they need to have a purpose. And they're telling you and they're dictating, well, actually, if you do not focus on ESG, if you don't focus on how to develop things properly, how do you create more efficiency, I'm not interested. And all of the use cases that we have around the world indicate that you actually, if you implement efficiency measures, if you put solar and other things, you're going to be able to create better returns. You're going to be able to create more momentum within employees. They're going to feel that they're connected and they have a purpose. So I am optimistic, but there is a lot of challenges that we need to work on. But I think so it's clear that we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Marissa, we were talking there about, when I was talking about the speed of technological advancement, and Dr. Riyad Mari mentioned the examples from Standard Chartered. Can you give us some of those examples as you sit there within one of the largest banks in the world? How's it going from your perspective?
Well, first of all, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and it was the easiest podcast to say yes to in a busy Davos week when Catherine called, because the women sitting on this panel in so many respects are not only people I admire for the work that they do, but they're wonderful collaboration partners. So this power of collaboration is part of the equation, I think, for all of us. I have Catherine beat. I'm going on nearly 40 years in the banking and capital markets industry, so I shudder to say that. But in a funny way, we're coming full circle, and that informs a lot of what I do, because in my early days, I sort of think of myself as a financier of early stage, high growth, impactful businesses. And that was expressed many, many, many years ago in building out infrastructure for mobile telephony and cable television and all these wonderful industries that we've enjoyed for so long. And now I get to do this not only at in the same sort of context of high growth, important, disruptive industries, which are going to be the industries of the future, but these industries, if we think about the overlay of sustainability, have an enormous opportunity for us to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. So that's a lot of what motivates me, and that sort of informs how I operate. And in terms of some of the exciting advances, I almost think about this in the context of bookends. So we see an enormous amount of intellectual capital, the brightest minds of the world, as you say, it's the next generation that have a burning mission to be a part of creating the world that they want to live in. And so they're putting their incredible intellectual capital toward things that we thought were nearly impossible. How long have we been talking about something like nuclear fusion? Do you know, we've been talking about it, and it was, is it ever going to work? Is it ever going to happen? Well, I can tell you, I sat next to the chief executive of what will be the first nuclear fusion company that will be launched. They are already in, sort of operational phase to deliver truly clean energy. And that is going to be a game changer for the planet, truly green energy. And there is no real radioactive waste problem. So all these issues that we faced in the past. Other end of the spectrum, in an exciting way, is the amount of scale that is happening, the speed and scale. I've just returned from a trip to India. You now need to be on a plane to fly over a solar field. It is so big. And so the speed of how quickly the renewables revolution is happening. And it excites me to think about where the allocation of capital is happening. So in 2023, we don't quite have the full statistics for 2024, but I'm sure they're equally the same. Nearly a trillion, so 900 billion of FID, so fit for development purpose CapEx, was approved for renewables. In contrast to fossil fuels was about 38. So think about that differential. So this is where the capital is going. And to Anne-Marie's point, it's the smart money because first of all, you generate phenomenal returns. But again, it is essentially where the direction of travel is going to be in terms of, ensuring the future that we all want to create for our kids and our grandkids. So there's these sorts of technological innovations, both on the scale side and on the breakthrough side. The other area that we're very excited about is nature. Nature has been I would say, a underappreciated place to allocate capital. The traditional capital providers have not thought about conservation as an investable topic. And yet, over the last couple of years, we've reframed that and we have created some amazing breakthroughs. I've had the good fortune to work on an instrument called a debt for nature swap, where we take the stressed, and many of the developing market countries have of an over burden of debt, and we need to figure out how we recalculate that debt and provide something that's manageable. But what we have come along as financial providers and said is, in many of the instances where we face this issue in, say, in island-bound nations, their very reliance, their GDP, their health, their source of livelihood is dependent on nature. And yet money hasn't gone to nature. That's a funny equation. How do we change that? So we said we will come along and restructure the debts of these countries under one condition, that we create a pool of capital that is ring-fenced. It cannot be used for any other source to invest in nature. And that creates a positive virtuous circle because the very thing they're dependent on is now getting funded. And the other beautiful thing, and then I'll stop, is another innovation in the same context is that in the past, NGOs, particularly conservation NGOs, were considered a little bit maybe in conflict with banks, right? They were challenging banks of why we're funding some of the historical industries that perhaps were not helping our planet. Today, those very conservation organizations are our partners in these structures because I know what I do well. I can raise money. I can structure deals. I'm not a biodiversity expert. I don't know how to put the money to work. They do. And they become our partners in the very same structure. So this is an amazing financial innovation. And it's scaling. It's becoming an asset class. Who knew conservation investment in marine economies could be a thing? And now it's something that is an absolute real source of capital and positive outcome.
Anne-Marie wanted to jump in.
I did. I'm sort of reluctant to take the conversation away from your innovation and nature finance. And there's a lot more we could say about that. And I'm here celebrating some work we're doing with various partners on revenues for nature, looking at other really fantastic opportunities to invest in nature through nature markets, for example. But congratulations on the transaction, Marissa. But what I wanted to pick up on actually was the point you were making about the relative expenditure for clean energy versus fossil fuels. And tying back to the question you asked about Trump, which was we're seeing a really extraordinary situation now where the leader of America is effectively trying to pit the US as a petrostate against China that is effectively going to become one of the world's first electrostates. So you mentioned the nearly 2 trillion of investment globally in clean energy. In 2023, of the 1.8 that was spent that year, 700 of that was spent in China. And it was the first year ever that the aggregate of the amount spent on clean energy in Europe and the US was greater than China. Such has been their dominance. And it strikes me as Donald Trump is someone who very clearly likes to win. He's a businessman who likes to win. And you do wonder at what point he realizes that he is being very badly advised and that he certainly cannot win going down a non-scientific petrostate, fossil fuel heavy strategy.
So once he does get stuff done. So let's be optimistic that he will have good advisors and that will flip. We can only be optimistic. I'm just going to stick with you, Riyam Mari, briefly, if I may. Recently, the UK government set up a new £7.3 billion national wealth fund to invest in clean energy projects. And as the chair of its independent task force yourself, how do you ensure that the money is best spent to cut emissions whilst also providing value to taxpayers? And we know the ESG backlash has been filtering through, and also private investors.
Well, I've got good news for all of those interested in investing in the growth and prosperity of the UK economy. It started off as a 7.3 billion intention, but has now ballooned to 27 billion because the money was actually, the additional balance sheet was actually given to the existing UK Infrastructure Bank, led by John Flint, formerly the chief executive of HSBC. And so now we have a new mandate, 27 billion of government money, which is called a National Wealth Fund. But, despite being the chair of the task force, one of the things I completely failed at doing was renaming it as a green sovereign catalytic fund, because that's what we really need, is for this money to be used to actually support sort of de-risking and support the more catalytic types of innovative finance that we need to see, especially in things like first-of-a-kind technologies. So focusing on, batteries, focusing on ports, focusing on hydrogen, personal topic that I'm very excited about, sustainable aviation fuel. All of these have very, very similar risk profiles that currently are struggling to attract capital because of the nature of the technology and the political risk. So there's a huge role to play for that 27 billion to be partnering with the private sector. And indeed, it has two aspects of its mandate that I'd like to highlight. One of them is the expectation that for every pound that it spends, that it actually crowds in 3 times as much private capital. I think in certain sectors, that'll be easily surpassed. In others, it might be a bit more challenging. And the second, and the media didn't pick up on this so much, but one of the conditions that the Treasury accepted during the National Wealth Fund Task Force process was that not every transaction needed to meet a hurdle rate, which was in line with long-term gilts, sort of 4-5%. Instead, we could take a portfolio view on returns. And that's actually a game changer, because it does mean that you can take greater risk on certain transactions, because what you're doing is looking at the overall return. And that now applies to the full 27 billion. So how do we make sure that it really focuses on the green technologies and the industries of the future on which we can build our prosperity and drive the growth that our current government is so keen to see? Well, I was very pleased to see that the chair of the Climate Change Committee was in speaking with the National Wealth Fund colleagues just yesterday, emphasizing the importance and the role of finance in actually meeting our climate goals. And finally, I know this sounds very parochial. We're in Davos as a global audience. But the important thing of doing these types of transactions and setting up these kind of institutions is the ability to share that knowledge, learn from others, but also share that knowledge. And I do think I've been to a number of events this week where we always, and it was great to hear your example, Marissa, it's important for us to keep emphasizing examples of where things work, because we know there are a lot of people out there who have the ear of the politicians, who are absolutely focused and they have vested interests in maintaining the status quo. And they will be telling those politicians that things are impossible. And that's where the power of examples come into their own, because you can say, this is very hard. And to your point, exactly, this is very, very hard, but it's not impossible because it has been done. And we're very, very hopeful. It's early days for the new National Wealth Fund, but very, very excited and hopeful at some of the transactions that we're going to see it
And can I just
undertake.
speak for just 1 second about the leadership of the UK? Because again, energy tends to go where things are noisiest, and negative energy feeds negative energy. And the sort of, I would say, European region has been kind of in the middle of this debate. You have China going all in on the green energy revolution, and we have what's going on in America, and the Europe seems lost in the middle. And yet you see some amazing examples of leadership. So to your point, the UK government has supported one of the first scale projects for carbon capture and storage, which we have the good fortune to be part of the financing group. This is a multi-billion-dollar project of a carbon capture facility, which is still, one would argue is in the riskier stage. And the UK, because technically the tech works, but there's a very big execution risk. This hasn't been done in this size before. And the UK government has stepped up and effectively has provided the underlying credit support for this project, which allowed us to underwrite at scale. So that is a beautiful example of the government leaning in, giving a signal to the private sector to allow very large sums of capital to flow to a project that's quite important for creating jobs and demonstrating a new technology of the future can happen at scale economic size.
Catherine, to that point about showcasing examples, GIB Asset Management's philosophy is that investors can achieve better returns by serving people and the planet, and we are hearing of examples of that now. Why isn't everyone following that approach, and how much pushback are you getting, or not at all, because you're doing such a good job selling it?
So, I think we've already heard that the ESG conversation has had some tricky times over the past couple of years. And to the point that Marissa made about we've really got to lean in to try to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. At the heart of our investment philosophy at GIB, that is really what we try to get to. We really try to divide our sort of deep thematic work into people and planet. It sounds easy, but actually, it's complicated in some ways. And this is where I suppose the whole benefit of AI and the AI revolution has really come into it. So I hear very often that people worry about the threat of AI and they say, oh, it's just going to take all of our jobs. And my response very simply is, it's not that jobs will disappear, jobs will change. And I think, really at the heart of any investment philosophy and process, it's about data. So we look for those data points, we look for those organizations who are really trying to sort of push the envelope in a private sector perspective. And, I think what's really telling is that last year, 2024, we saw the peak of recent years in sustainable investment going through assets under management. So, it's always, it's yin and yang. There will be some people who will say it doesn't work, but actually over time, in as much as the diversity conversation took place 10, 15 years ago, and we probably all went, oh my goodness, I actually think that the sustainability conversation is going to get reframed. For me, it is simply about good risk management. You wouldn't buy something if you thought it was going to damage your health. You wouldn't buy something if you thought it was not safe to get in and drive. So I think it's a whole reframing. And I suppose bringing it all together from an investment and optimistic perspective, I think what I've learned from this week is that the castle on the hill is still in the same place, but how we're going to get there is changing. I think the narrative is changing. I think we're reframing that conversation. And I think most importantly, particularly given what we're seeing in the US, the where it's changing is really going to shift. And I think that, frankly, sitting as I do, based in London, but very much representing an organization from the Gulf region, from Saudi Arabia, I'm so excited about the opportunities that we see in that part of the world because climate change is definitely real. So I think, it's a reframing. You've got to come back to the data, and companies are getting on the program. So, I think as we learned through the launch of the corporate health check this week through CDP, 2/3 of the world's market cap are now disclosing through CDP. So people are on the program, and investors like us are holding those companies to account. So then you create that virtuous flywheel of collaboration that companies are doing the right thing, investors will value them. And at the end of the day, retail consumers will benefit from that because hopefully we'll be making the right decisions to keep their investments safe for many years to come.
To that point, Dr. Manar, around reframing the conversation, and I loved hearing what Catherine said there around good risk management and marrying the data with the growth. Is that how you're presenting the transition to clean energy, as that sort of opportunity for growth in the MENA countries, particularly when the tide feels like, through the media, through what we're hearing from policymakers, the tide appears to be turning on climate action?
I don't think so it's turning. I think so it's more of a recalibration, that you're saying more information is available now so people can make better decisions. It's not changing the base of where you want to hit. You're still moving toward there. Sustainable and impact investment has proven to be successful. This is what everyone is focusing on. We didn't have all of the information to move with the right speed. And at the end of the day, impact investment might not be for everyone. It's a journey. Some people who have more maturity, their companies, the people, the system, they're able to move with speed because they're able to create the right systems, processes for them to take that step and move forward. Others might need more time to develop it, and that's okay. That's part of the development. But so far, what we're seeing, the appetite for impact investment is actually increasing. And now we're doing a better job of profiling partners from around the world. It's important when I go talk to someone, I need to talk to someone who share the same values that we do, someone who cares about the environment as we do. It doesn't make sense for me to go and start a conversation if someone do not have this in mind. It's going to take time. He's going to come along, but not today, maybe in a few years' time. And that's what's important for us, is to select the right partners that we can work with. And once we select them, is to try really to develop use cases and then communicate them. Because the more that you communicate all of these successes, you're going to be able to bring more people on board in developing them. I'm actually, on the contrary, I see that there is more appetite, and it's a time of recalibration. We've announced a project a few years ago in which, when we announced it, the skepticism in the room was unbelievable. Everyone said, oh, this is never going to happen. Financial institutions, we will never finance it. This is not going to happen. Everyone was with that direction. Guess what? When we've developed everything, now it was oversubscribed by investors as well as bank and financial institutions, and we had more than 23 banks be part of the financing. So if you provide the right information, everyone is going to come along. But again, it's a journey, and I don't think so things are changing. We're just, the more information and data is available, we're recalibrating to have a better ground and base of what are the next steps. And that's going to continue for the next few years.
Talking about communicating successes, and the word seems to be, from this first episode, collaboration. To that point, Rian Mari, can you talk to us a little bit about the most successful programs of the Green Finance Institute to move money into the clean economy?
Gosh, thank you, Naomi, an opportunity to showcase our work. Thank you very much. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Green Finance Institute, we are a group now of almost 80, mostly former bankers and asset managers, who work very closely with both policymakers and the financial institutions to find creative ways of investing and making sure that money is going towards real economy projects and outcomes that we want to see. So to that end, I'm a former banker, so I'm obviously going to want to quantify some of our impact to date. So I'll obviously start with a 27 billion National Wealth Fund that we helped get capitalised. But there is also the UK's Green Sovereign Bond Programme, which is now over £25 billion. We've got 200 companies that are currently availing of the investment readiness funds for nature that we're current advisors on. We set up a 500 million future finance fund in London, which importantly, whilst not a blended fund, has a sidecar that actually makes sure that money is getting deployed. It's actually a sort of origination transition lab that sits alongside. And we actually think that that's absolutely critical and should be replicated elsewhere. And one of our things that we're very proud of doing is we've actually catalysed a green mortgage market in the UK. So we didn't used to have one, but that's you're able to get a mortgage that gives you better terms and conditions if your home is more energy efficient. And whilst the banks, there are over 61 green mortgage products that are out there now. When we first started, there were only 3. One of them I launched at Barclays myself. So the banks are a little coy at saying exactly what their volumes are, but we estimate it might be up to 6% of the UK mortgage market is green. And the important thing is we are now present in 9 different countries, and we are learning from those countries and exporting as well some of the successes that we've had. But I do think the greatest success that we've had at the Green Finance Institute isn't a quantifiable one directly, is the fact when I started 5.5 years ago, I was very lucky to be backed by many people for what seemed at the time quite a bold strategy of not looking at finance as a sector that needed to be greened, but as a facilitator for all the other sectors in the real economy that needed to lower their emissions. And I say facilitator, not enabler, because I do believe that policy is the enabler, but finance is the critical facilitator. And I do think that we have shifted that conversation, certainly in the UK, certainly with the UK government, that view finance and its role in this whole transition in a very, very different way. And so our aim over the next few years, one, is to make sure that we replicate that sort of that approach in other countries, and that appears to be going well. And breaking news, we received from the regulator just last week our registration to set up our own fund. So we're really excited about doing that, and in order to actually be able to bring some of the solutions that we've been working on for the last few years to the market even more quickly, so that we can actually catalyze some of those ideas. And to be clear, these are ideas that we co-design with partners, with other large financial institutions. We don't just think them up in a lab. We're actually very much there to amplify great ideas that are out in the market. And I'll get in trouble if I don't mention our local climate bonds, which I'll say very quickly, which is a fantastic innovation that we do with our partners, Abundance, a crowdsourcing platform that enable communities around the UK to invest in their own community projects through their local authorities. And we think we've had 14 local authorities take this up so far. The numbers are still quite small. I think we're still looking at only 12 million that's been raised, but two things. One, the potential is huge, creating a new asset class, to borrow Marissa's phrase, but also we did some work looking at the people that invest in these projects in their communities, assuming it would be the wealthiest. And actually, our data showed that it was people from all different socioeconomic groups that were finding ways to invest from as little as £5 in things that they felt were really important to their community. And that, I think, is a note of great optimism.
That is a note of great optimism. Final question, I'd like to come to Marissa and Catherine. So I've been scribbling down here trying to do my maths on 40 years and 35 years. So if I'm right, Marissa, 1984, right? And Catherine, 1989, around then, right. So in the next 40 years, so 2064, 2069, what can we expect to see? What can we do for future generations to maintain that momentum and to do something now to accelerate climate action? Marissa, if I come to you.
Well, in my mind, we have to also, and we've talked about this almost in some ways as we set the scene here in this beautiful venue, this is all ultimately about people, right? This comes down to climate affecting people. And we have to remember, we talk about the E and the S and the G. The S seems to sometimes get lost in the equation as we think about these breakthrough technologies. Who are we serving? We're serving people. And it just was, you were rattling through the extraordinary amount of things you've gotten done. And I think you deserve such a huge amount of credit. I mean, that's just, I was trying to keep up with everything that you put in place these 5 years and my head is spinning. So kudos to you. But back to sort of sometimes having to remember why we're doing this. I remember working on the UK first green bond green bond program, and we said, well, what if we put social KPIs? Do you remember this in the green bond, because they were only going to put green KPIs? We said, well, what about the people? And that got, I think, us all reminding ourselves, like you said, who are the most excited about some of these products? It's the communities who say we're being affected by this, and that informs me every day. So when I think about when we look forward a few years, one topic that I'd love to surface, and I've been actively trying to surface this, is the notion of finance for adaptation and resilience, because all of the things we're doing to mitigate climate change, that is fabulous, and it must continue. But we also need a lot of capital to flow to allow us to be more resilient to deal with what's coming at us. Whether you look at California or you look at floods in Pakistan, money has not gone in that direction. And if we come back to the heart of where capital does flow, It's always when there's a good, viable commercial opportunity. And my view is phenomenal returns are born out of necessity. And what are the goods and services we are going to want to buy in future? Those are the ones that create the resilience. When we build back a California, we're not going to build in the same way. What are the new sorts of walls and windows? We should be informed by history. We do that in nature all the time now, looking to indigenous populations and what has worked. But equally, what is it that's going to protect us? And so I think as we look forward a few years, when I talk about a big asset class, it will be hundreds of billions, if not trillions, in this market, which will be an adjunct to all of our climate work.
Thank you. Catherine, 2069.
Wow. Well, I'd like to think that this podcast series will be still at the top of the most famous podcast series about climate. But no, seriously, I think that Marissa absolutely made a good point. And building on what Manar said, today, this topic is not necessarily for everybody. And it's much easier in some ways to be a naysayer than to be all in. But the fact that we're all sitting here today and we felt it was important to have this conversation tells me that there are bold voices making life choices for their careers. And there are many others in this room and other ladies who will follow in later episodes who are really devoting their whole life to thinking about what can they do personally to make a difference. So yes, I hope that it's not a series of choices that we're making in 2069. It is just something that is so embedded in everything that we're doing. Companies will be doing the right thing. Governments will be doing the right thing. Consumers will simply have a better life. And we know today that female investors typically think about these topics much more so than their male counterparts. UBS have just done a really interesting study. It says that 70% of women embed it into their investment decisions versus about mid-50s for men. And so I think if in one small way, Naomi, if through this series we've created a series of amazing case studies with extraordinary women doing fantastic things, then I think in 2069, perhaps we'll have informed the next generation who will say, I wasn't going to do that for a career until I heard the podcast. And now, look where I am.
Thank you. Well, this has been the first episode of the Women in Climate podcast series. I've been Naomi Kerbel and joined by Dr. Manar Al-Manif, Dr. Rianne Murray-Thomas, Marissa Drew and Catherine Garrett-Cox. On future episodes, we'll be joined by Sherry Madeira from the Carbon Disclosure Project and Jane Burston from the Clean Air Fund, amongst many others. It's been a pleasure to speak with you all today. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you for listening. This podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. GIB Asset Management is a boutique asset management firm that provides a diverse investment offering across the risk-return spectrum, in equities and fixed income, alongside their treasury business, which aims to provide effective and bespoke solutions. GIB Asset Management is based in London with an AUM of $6 billion as of December 2024.